Hey guys, welcome to the Guild.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having us.
Great to have you. We've had a few sessions a few years ago around ETL. And I was really excited to see AI now as part of what you all can do. So really excited about this session. I guess before we get into it, maybe we can go and introduce each one of you just so everyone knows how experts you are with ETL and testing and all the good stuff.
Great. Yeah, I'll jump in. My name is Matthew Moss. I am the product manager for QuerySurge. I've been with QuerySurge's parent company, RTTS, for over 14 years, and we focus on data testing, automation, and the process there, and I help lead the team.
All right. My name is Mike Calabrese. I am a senior solutions architect with RTTS. I work with customers all around the world with their QuerySurge implementations. Joined RTTS about 15 years ago, starting out as a software test engineer. So starting out in the functional testing space and now moving into the ETL and data validation space. So quite the journey, and excited to talk about QuerySurge and QuerySurge AI today.
Awesome. Well, the Guild floor is all yours. I know we're getting ready for a presentation and a demo. So as you get ready for that, everyone, just a heads up, we will have some polls going on. And during the polls, like I mentioned, it'll be available under the Q&A polls tab. So once you all share your screen, we'll go back to the presentation. And let's do it.
Great. So I guess I can jump right in here. If everyone's seeing the screen, I want to thank everyone for joining us today on this webinar on leveraging AI to simplify and speed up your ETL testing. During this slide presentation, I'm just going to go over some of the challenges in regards to data testing and the industry as a whole, how you can automate your testing, where QuerySurge and AI come into play, and then I'll pass it over to Mike to give a demo of QuerySurge AI, which will show you real-world implementation on how you could use AI to speed up your data testing effort. And then we'll jump back into the slide deck and go a little bit about where we are going as a company with AI and how we're constantly looking to improve the AI platform itself. Just give me 1 second. There we go. So some of the challenges that are facing the industry. So IDC did a poll and found that 79% of organizations have over 100 data sources, with 30% of organizations having over 1,000 data sources. This is a huge challenge when it comes to any tester to just understand where their data is coming from, but have the capabilities to test all of those different platforms. As organizations are not just using, say, a single data platform, they may be doing hundreds of different platforms. So that's a huge challenge when it's dealing with data complexity. In addition to this, data is growing at a really exponential growth. Over the past 5 years or so, data has been growing at a compounded annual growth rate of 40%. We went from a little under 4 exabytes in 2021, and we're predicted to pass 21,000 exabytes in 2026. And this is structured data. So the amount of data that needs to be tested is growing just astronomically. And without any automation, it's going to be impossible to make sure that that data is correct and is valid for your team. So just some quotes from different organizations. IDC says the lack of automation impacts the ability to scale data management. 40% of organizations haven't been able to automate any of the data process. So that data is being done manually for its testing initiatives, or it's a process that goes one-offs. And poor data quality now costs organizations an average of $12.9 million annually. So if you're not doing data testing, you are likely causing your company to lose some type of money due to either poor business decisions or incorrect decisions based off of incorrect data analysts. So how can we solve these data challenges? The solution to this is an automated data testing solution. And our product, QuerySurge, allows you to automate your data movement through any of your data sources, whether it's flat files, whether it's mainframes, or whether it's more traditional data sources like SQL Server and the like. QuerySurge itself is a product from our parent company, RTTS. which began as a pure play QA and testing organization. We built QuerySurge to fit a need that wasn't in the industry back in 2012. There was no automation against data testing. And we actually were on a client and needed to have a solution. And we built QuerySurge specifically for that need. QuerySurge has expanded over the years. We have over 200 customers in 30 countries. This is just a small subset from the banking industry to pharma and tech of some of the customers that are currently using QuerySurge to test their data as it moves throughout their system architecture. And you can see we also have across all of the major Fortune 500s. Alliance partners. So QuerySurge tries to partner with all of the top industry players, whether it's technology partners such as CData, Cloudera, and Microsoft, global system integrators like IBM, Infosys, and Wipro, or regional consulting firms. We have over 80 partners for QuerySurge in over 40 countries. So if you have any need for QuerySurge and need support, we have plenty of partners that are available that can help you implement QuerySurge and get it off the ground and running. So what's the issue with our data? What we know is that C-level executives are using BI and analytics to make critical business decisions. The data that is being aggregated in their data marts and data warehouses are going to BI reports, and decisions are being made on that data. And what we know is the data is not fine. In almost all cases, there's corruption, missing data, or just completely wrong data that's being flown to those particular reports. And it's important to catch that before someone makes a decision. And that is where QuerySurge helps, because it helps you automate the validation and testing of your valuable corporate data sets. Some of the supported use cases: data warehouse testing. So testing your big data warehouses, whether that is Snowflake, Azure, Redshift, and the like. Your big data initiatives, where you're moving your data to a large scale platform, maybe Hadoop. We can assist with validating that. DevOps and data ops pipelines. QuerySurge has a robust API, so you can integrate QuerySurge with any platform that you have. We have built-in plugins for Azure DevOps, but we also have documentation on how to connect to Jenkins or Informatica. Data migration efforts. So as you move from one platform to another, say you were going from a legacy system, maybe an old school Netezza instance, and you're moving now to the cloud and you're using Snowflake, QuerySurge can help validate that that data movement is successful. BI and analytical efforts. So not only do we test the data in your data platforms, we can test the BI and analytic reports. So whether you're using Tableau, MicroStrategy, Cognos, or a few other platforms, we can help you test your BI reports by actually pulling the data directly out of the BI reports and allowing you to put tests against them. Finally, here we have ERP and enterprise apps. We can connect to those as well, whether it's SAP or any ERPs that you might have in-house. So how does QuerySurge work? Well, QuerySurge connects any two endpoints at one time. And that could be an endpoint in the same data store. Maybe it's an aggregate table compared to its non-aggregate system, or two completely different data stores, say a flat file to Snowflake. And what it does is allows you to pull that data into our system. And you can see here some examples of source and target data. And that could be your databases, your flat files, whether they're CSVs, Excels, or JSON. And it could be connecting on the other side to your BI reports or your big data stores like Hadoop and NoSQL. QuerySurge pulls that into its own analysis engine and compares every single cell. So whether you're testing 100 records or 1 billion records, QuerySurge goes cell by cell and finds any issues or anomalies, and then gives you detailed reports as to what went wrong. The great thing about this is it incredibly speeds up your testing effort. If you would do this by eye, it would take you probably the rest of time, especially with the data sets that we're dealing with. So let's just talk about the data testing process. So data is moving from your source systems, whether that's SQL Server, Oracle, XML web services. It's being ETL'd over to your big data lake stores. Maybe that's Hadoop or NoSQL, being ETL'd again to your data warehouse and data mart. and then finally landing on your BI and analytics reports. The ETL developers are going to be the ones that are creating these mappings. So at every single hop, they're actually coding that movement, whether that is with shell scripts, whether that's with ETL tool sets like Informatica. They're coding each one of those changes, and the data might be manipulated at every single hop. QuerySurge gets put in at every single link and allows you to test to make sure any of the data is not getting corrupted through those movements and are meeting the mapping requirements that your team has specified. So you might have some documents that are written to say the data from point A should be aggregated by month. What QuerySurge would allow you to do is validate and make sure that is correct. And when you find any issues or anomalies, you can address that before it starts impacting your BI and analytics reports. So I just want to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. I know many people here probably have heard a ton about that. Artificial intelligence has blown up since ChatGPT went live on November 30th, 2022. But there's still a little bit of information out there that people might not know. So I just want to level set what we mean by artificial intelligence. When we're talking about AI, it's the ability for computers to understand their environment and solve problems rationally. What we mean by that is we want to be able to ask questions to our software and for it to provide us answers that maybe it was never coded for, using the plethora of knowledge that was used to make that particular AI model. Something that we will talk about very heavily is language models. And what these are models that are built for natural language processing. There's a lot of AI models out there, whether it's graphics models or whether it's just analytical models dealing with numbers. We are focusing mostly on natural language processing because we want to be able to ask how to do a transformation and for the system to give us a response from it. Quote here from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and something that I very much agree with, is that AI is the defining technology of our time. We have seen very big shifts in the industry due to the introduction of robust and capable AI. And I think we are going to see a complete shift in how we do our testing, as well as how organizations build software because of AI. And we can see that with the massive growth in AI models. From 2010 to now, models have been growing at 4x per year. And that is the training that is building those models themselves. And what we're seeing is they're becoming ever more accurate. There was always a fear when models were first coming out in the early days of large language models that they would hallucinate a lot, which is essentially giving you the wrong answer for the questions that you're posing. But with this new training sets that have been constantly increasing, the models are becoming more and more accurate. And thus, the results that you're going to get are going to be something that you can trust and use in your environment. So, how can data testers leverage AI? Well, let's talk a little bit about test strategy and what it was like before AI. So, from a data testing, approach, one of the first and most common strategies is table-to-table or column-to-column compares. That is validating that your data has moved from point A to point B and matches identically. No transformations, just simple point A, point B. Skill level wise, it's pretty basic. You can write a select star or just list the columns out. And the design effort is pretty minimal. You just need to know the tables that you're comparing through. In QuerySurge, we have something called the Query Wizard, which allows you to automate that process. It's just drag and drop and requires no skill. The other approach, test strategy-wise, is row count compares. This is really high level. Instead of comparing the underlying data, you're just making sure that you have the same number of records. Again, the skill level is very basic. The design effort is very minimal, but its accuracy is just going to tell you that you have the same number of records between your source and your targets. Business rules is a little bit of a step up. This is where you're validating that your data makes business sense. For example, if you have a phone number field, it should meet a certain pattern, or maybe a name should never be null or empty. This does require some intermediate skills because you will need to know how to write those particular validations. But overall, the design effort's a little bit moderate. You're not writing the full transformations. You're just kind of making sure the data makes sense. Finally here, the main way you would test your data is the ETL logic and transformation. This is where the testers reproduce the ETL logic per the requirements and make sure that that movement is correct. This requires intermediate/advanced skills because you need to know the complex SQL transformations in order to do those ETL items. And it's fairly difficult/moderate in terms of time to design those items because you're essentially reproducing the ETL transformation itself. This is our target for AI. The others are pretty straightforward. This is where we want to be able to speed up our testing effort and save the most amount of time when it comes to creating tests for your data sets. So before I go into a little bit of how we do that, I want to talk about what a data mapping is for those that are not familiar. A data mapping is a process of matching fields from one database to another. It's analogous to functional requirements. It's usually a written document that's created in-house that describes how your data is being changed and moved between your source and target systems. The mapping document, also known as a source to target map, is critical in order for you to plan any tests and to create your tests, as there's no way to know what the requirements are if it's not been established upfront. This defines the ETL process, or the extract, transform, and load process. It usually captures business rules, things like filtering of data sets or how it's going to be manipulated, the data flow, and any movement requirements. It usually specifies what the source and target are and what their output should be, and has absolute or optional data requirements. We actually surveyed the industry on LinkedIn. We did a survey of over 380 analysts, architects, and ETL developers, specifically talking about mappings. And the reason why we did this is our AI model focuses on generating your test from mapping documents. And why we did that was this particular survey. What we found was if a company uses formal mapping documents, what particular store did they store that information in? And we found that 81% of companies had formal mapping documents that described their transformations from their source to the target systems. 78% of those mappings were stored in Excel, with the rest being stored in third-party tool sets or custom implementations. The other question we asked was approximately how many mappings did you have in your typical data warehouse project? And they, on average, said over 68% had 250 mappings or more, with 14% saying between 100 and 250 mappings. So there's a lot of test cases that would need to be created in order to validate your data set. Talking about the AI process. So right here, I'm going to talk about the test process without automated data validation and an ETL solution. So if you were to go about testing those 250 mappings without any automated solution and without AI, you'd require two skilled resources to create your tests, to pull out your data from your source and target systems. They would dump those tests to files, whether that's Excel or a custom file format, and then manually compare and summarize the results. If you're dealing with, say, 100 records, that's not a problem. If you're dealing with 1 million records, it's probably something that's not going to be fully capable of done manually. And what we know is these two areas are time sinkholes. You need to have someone that has the skill to write your SQL, and you need to take the time to analyze and compare your data sets. When you have an automated solution like QuerySurge, we do have a slight change in the process. You still require skilled resources to create your SQL, but your automated testing solution now executes your tests and then compares that automatically inside of the automation solution. And this runs considerably faster. With QuerySurge, you can see up to 1,000 times faster result analysis than what you would have manually. But we noticed that even with this solution, you have a huge amount of time savings on the comparison. The creation of your test cases are still a manual process and does take considerable amount of time. If you wanted to start a new project with 250 mappings that are fairly complex, this could take you days, weeks, or even months to create. QuerySurge with AI solves these problems. What it does is allows you to automate the creation of your query pairs or your tests by using AI. And what this does is automatically convert your mapping documents into SQL statements that are used by QuerySurge without having any skill sets. And what you have is immense time savings on the creation and then on the comparison side. So considerably faster than just straight QuerySurge and even significantly faster than no solution whatsoever. So how do you integrate QuerySurge AI in your particular environments? Well, we have two main use cases. The first is the initial mapping upload. This is where you're bulk loading all of your mapping documents that you have historically. So if you have thousands of mapping documents, you might want to load this up into QuerySurge in one shot, and that would be the first approach. The second approach with QuerySurge AI is you can always add new mappings later on. As new projects come into the system and you need to create mapping documents for them and want to create tests, you'll be able to upload those directly into QuerySurge and create new tests on the fly for them. Just an example of what this would look like. You would upload your mapping documents, your initial mapping load. It would go into our AI utility. That would convert all of your mapping documents, which are written in plain English that are not actual test cases. They just kind of at a high level describe the manipulation of the data and how it's moving. QuerySurge AI would convert that automatically into SQL, as you can see above. And those SQL tests could then be run by your team without any intervention. The same thing can happen with an incremental load. You can load all of those additional files later on. So it's up to you to decide how you want to approach it. In terms of ROI, based off of our surveys, we found that over 20% of our customers have 1,000 mappings or more, with 10% having over 5,000 mappings, which is just a huge amount of mapping information and a huge amount of tests that would need to be created. If we take an average complexity of those mappings and say it takes about 1 hour of time to create, if you had 1,000 mappings, it would take approximately 1,000 people hours to create all of those mappings for test cases inside of your automation solution. Going with an average hourly consulting rate of $100 an hour, that would cost approximately $100,000 to create all of those mapping tests in your environment. QuerySurge AI can translate 200 mappings per hour or 1,000 mappings in 5 hours. And this is completely automated. You don't need to sit and watch it. It's something that you can set it and forget it. And what that essentially costs, if you wanted to watch it, would be about $500. And what you can see here is being able to automate the creation of your test cases without having to manually go in and write that SQL is a huge return on investment. You go from $100,000 to only $500 in order to generate all of your query pairs for your validation set. So this is an incredible improvement on the old process approach and really can speed up your overall creation of your tests. So before I go into where we're going into the future, now that you have a high level of QuerySurge and QuerySurge AI, I'm going to pass this over to Mike to show you a demo so that way you can see QuerySurge AI in action.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Matt. In addition to the ROI, making our lives easier as testers is definitely another benefit, especially for us practitioners, to be able to create and develop these tests. So I'll go ahead and share my demo environment now, and we'll jump right in. First, as Matt mentioned, I do want to talk about the ETL testing process before we jump into QuerySurge AI. Matt covered the mapping documentation and as I mentioned in my introduction, I started out as a functional tester specializing in functional automation. So I at least compare the mapping documents to those functional requirements, to those user stories. The user stories define how an application should function, how a checkbox or a text box should work. Same thing is true for these ETL mappings. They're going to define how the data should move through your systems. In my demo environment here, I've set up a small ETL process, very simplistic one. We're having a sales database that's going to contain some sales and customer information. That's going to get ETL'd over into a sales data warehouse where that data gets rearranged, sometimes maybe transformed for analytical purposes. Matt showed in the slide deck maybe some more complicated ETL hops where you may have multiple data sources, multiple movements that occur. And that's pretty common with data environments and architectures today. But when we're talking about QuerySurge, I think the key, and ETL testing in general, the key is to sort of break that down into the individual data movements. So anytime data moves throughout a system, that's a chance for issues to occur. And that's a point where you need to focus in your testing on. So how does QuerySurge help us with all this? Well, we'll start with a pretty basic mapping. I think as basic as you can get. We have a products table here in our source system. And every column that's part of this products table is going to move into our target data warehouse. And there's not going to be any transformations for this. So straight data movement, I like to call it lift and shift of data between your source and your target. And we'll talk about how QuerySurge can assist with testing that. And I know many of you probably are seeing QuerySurge for the first time, so we'll jump right in and do some basics of the tool here. So QuerySurge itself, server-based application, users can access it through their favorite web browser. And we're going to start here in our module called the design library. And this is where you can create and develop all of your tests. So I'm going to click on this create query pair button, and we're going to create a test here. We're going to call this test based off of our mapping document. So I usually like to follow a naming convention of using source table, source field, target table, target field. So we'll call this one products. I can type. And then since there is not any transformations for each of the individual columns, we're going to just test all the columns at once. And then we'll call this dim products. And we'll say all, because we're going to test all the columns with this test. And we'll click save. And here we have a query pair created. Basically, two sides of the query pair. One side going against the source system. On the right-hand side, we're going against the target system, both for the purposes of extracting result sets from those systems and then comparing them to identify any differences. So we can write a basic select star from the products table here. And on our target side, we can write a select star from our dim product table here. And now, before running this, we'll need to select a connection. Connections in QuerySurge are set up within the administration module. They can connect, QuerySurge utilizes JDBC drivers to connect to data sources. So that pretty much gives us the option to connect to anything out there in the marketplace today. So anything from your AWS to Azure Stack to things like flat files or Excel files, you can do and test with QuerySurge. I do have in my demo environment here some SQL Server, which is going to be our first example connection set up. And one thing I'd like to point out before I come off of this screen is that each connection does have an ID, and that's going to be important later on when we get to QuerySurge AI. So I just want you to remember that. So our connection for our source is going to be demo source, my SQL Server, and target is going to be demo target SQL Server. So now once I have my connection set, I can click save, just double check that I have my select statements right, and I think we're good. And every query pair has what we call a design time run. So this is a tab that you can go to on every query pair where you can run the queries that we have here on our source and our target against those systems and do a sort of one-time ad hoc run just to make sure that you're getting the responses back you need and just to sort of check if there's any differences here. So we'll wait for that to refresh. And here we go. We have our result. Looks like this test, there is a failure. The design time run gives us those high-level results. So we can see we have 100 records in each, the source and the target. If I click on this View Query Results button, that's going to showcase the actual granular level results. And in here, I can see all the products that we have. You can see we're selling some interesting stuff as far as iPhones and MacBooks and some headphones. And we can see both the source and the target side of this. So our sales database and our data warehouse. If I come over to the Failures tab, we can take a look at what exactly has gone wrong here. And for those 20 records that we're targeting as a failure here, we can see that something has gone wrong in our ETL process here. The categories has changed from shoes to sneakers. And that is not defined in our mapping document here. So we do have a defect on our hands as far as the ETL process is concerned for this specific field. And the benefit of using a tool like QuerySurge is that it can automatically detect these types of failures without having to go through and manually run those queries maybe on your ETL process or your SQL analyzer that you may have to view those. So at this point, you may be saying, Mike, ETL testing looks easy. Why do we need AI to help us out with this? But the complexity comes in, as Matt showcased in the slide deck, is when you start getting into those types of transformations that are going to occur between those systems. And our next mapping that we'll take a look at deals with the customers table migrating over to the DIM customers table. And here you can see we have 7 columns here in the DIM customer table. The first 4, there's no transformation, so it's a simple lift and shift again. However, the final 3 columns, we are actioning some transformations on them. And we'll focus in on this age column that's in our DIM customer table. And for that, we're actually going to derive a value, the actual age of someone based on their birth date, the date that's stored in the source system here. And we're going to have to, based on the transformation here, create our test to sort of mimic what was the expectation in the ETL process. So I can, as I had just done before, try and figure out what the SQL statements are going to be, or as we've all been waiting for, we can now see how QuerySurge AI can help us in creating this type of test. So QuerySurge AI is going to take in a template with a layout very similar to what you may see in this mapping document here. And I'll just do a little side by side so we can see. We're going to start with defining our mapping ID. So this is the mapping ID. We're going to focus in as 1.5. So this is just like a requirement ID. It's going to be something that we'll use for traceability in case anything does go wrong. We're going to follow the same sort of naming convention here. And I got my little cheat sheet, so I don't have to type it out. I'll paste that right in there, where we have the table, the column name, and then the target table, column name. And then unique to the QuerySurge AI mapping template, we're going to want to specify the source technology here in this upload. And the reason we're going to do that is so that the AI engine understands and knows which syntax to write our SQL. So we can say something like Microsoft SQL Server. We can say MS SQL Server. In all those cases, the AI engine should be able to understand and be able to interpret that and provide the proper syntax when writing our SQL for us. Now, I mentioned the source connection ID previously, and this is going to be important because we need to input that into our template. This is essentially when we load the query pairs into QuerySurge, allow us to pre-populate those connections when we generate our query pairs. Our source table is going to be the customers table here on the source side. So we'll go ahead and paste that in. And then we're going to focus in on the birth date table here, birth date column rather, and populate that in here. And if we were to just compare the 2 birth date fields to each other, that really isn't an accurate test. We want to make sure that the birth dates or the ages, assuming, are assigned to the proper customers. So we'll want to ensure that we include our customer IDs here. And that's going to be our key field that allows us to determine that the age is assigned to the correct customer and that the ETL process has completed successfully. And now the next column in the template is going to be what we call our source logic column. So this is the main column where you want to define in plain text, plain English, how the data is supposed to move. So we can say something like calculate the age by difference in years between the birth date and the current date. And that should allow the AI engine to read that in and provide the SQL necessary to make that calculation to us. And also, as best practice, and even with my query pairs that I write manually, I like to include an order by statement for the key field. This is so that the data for us humans that are reading the data aligns and views in a more readable fashion. And then the one thing I'm going to change here, I did populate this source column with birth date. But if we look at the target side, we're actually we're actually deriving the age column. So we don't want to pull the birth date column. We actually want to create the age column within our test as it would be created in the ETL. And then on the other side of the template, we have our target systems. We're going to populate the same technology. So we are moving within SQL Server, albeit to a different warehouse, different schema. Our target connection is going to be a different ID in QuerySurge, and that's ID 58. Our table is going to be the dim customer table, and we'll paste that in here, or we'll type it. And our target column is going to be the birth date column. The key column is the same. It's going to be customer ID. And then for our target side, we don't really have any logic to apply. We're just pulling straight from that table. We're going to observe the data as it is after the ETL process. So we can use a keyword like direct just to let the AI engine know that we don't want to apply any transformations here. We just want to pull straight data from these tables. So I can go ahead and save that template. I'll just do a quick double check to make sure we have everything we need. We have our target side looking good. Our source side pulling from the customers table looking good. And our source logic there. So once we have our template populated, we can now take advantage of QuerySurge AI. And in its current iteration is a standalone separate utility that can be installed on any user's desktop. And then they can load in the templates. And I'm loading in the one that we just created. And we should see now the middle pane here populate with all the information that is included within that template. So we'll see the mapping name, the query pair name, and so on and so forth come in as it has just done. We can double check the inputs here if we so choose. And if everything looks good, we can actually start generating some SQL. So I'll click this generate button. And we're actually reach out to the AI engine now. We're going to start generating some SQL based off our input. And we should see the source and target SQL statements populate in here in just a moment. So here we can see that we have some source SQL to calculate that age field. We're using specific SQL Server syntax, the date diff function specifically, as well as the get date function. If I were to input, or if I had to deal with a different set of technologies like Oracle, MySQL, those would involve some different functions possibly. So it's important to define that technology so we get those that proper syntax back. All right, so if everything looks good, I can actually click this import button now. And that will actually bring me over to QuerySurge. And if I open up our QuerySurge AI folder, we can see that this query pair has now just been imported from the tool. So without having to manually create anything, just by uploading the template and clicking import, I now have a query pair that I can run with my connections populated with the SQL required for those connections. And I can kick off another design time run. So I'll be able to go from a mapping document to actually testing and verifying in just a short amount of time with QuerySurge AI. So we can see that while this is running, all of the SQL that was populated by the AI engine is part of our source and target now. We can just get that refresh, and we have a data type difference too. So one of the things that QuerySurge does is check for data types between your source and your target. So it's going to look for, by default, like and kind data types. And if there is a difference to them, it's going to alert you to that. So a change in data types is something we also consider as a transformation. Mapping documents themselves do include, in most cases, the data types. So it's important to always check between those two different data types. And here we can see we have some issues with our ages being calculated. So we may need to take a look at and investigate what's going on there as well by looking at those results. And if we were to move on now to, let's say, another example, let's take a look at our fact order table. And in here, we have, we're sort of stepping up the complexity and for what we'll have to develop. Again, the first three columns that we have in our result set, no transformations, again, a lift and shift. But for our target table here in the fact order table, we're actually pulling in a customer name and a sales rep name. And we're not pulling them in as they are stored in the source side. We're actually combining the first and the last name here, and that's our transformation. We're adding the first and the last name into this customer name field. So we'll pull up now another template so we can generate tests for this entire table. And that would be our fact order table. And for this one, I've pre-populated all of the ancillary information other than our source and target logic. For our first two columns, we're going to say those are direct maps, and I'll want to say to order by the order ID. And we'll do that for the first two as there were no transformations. But for our customer name and our sales rep name, we'll want to do something where we join those mappings together. So I have this on pre-typed out cheat sheet source and target logics here. So we'll add those in here. And actually, that's for the sales rep. So we'll put sales rep here. And for our customers, we'll put in our customers here. So what we want to do is specify the tables that we're joining to. So we're going to pull this information not from the orders table, but from the customers table. So we're going to instruct the AI in our prompting to be able to do that. And then we're going to give it the logic. We're going to say we want to combine the first and last names with the space in between them. And that's how we're going to generate this customer name field that we'll have on the target. And the same thing goes for our target side. For the direct mappings, we can just put indirect since we're pulling straight from this table. And all that taken together should allow us to generate these 4 query pairs that will test this portion of the ETL process. So we can now load in this template in here for our fact order. We'll see that these query pairs will now populate with the information that we have in this mapping document, and we'll be able to load them into QuerySurge. Once we click generate, we'll see our SQL statements get generated, and these will be specific to the mappings that we have uploaded here in our template. We can also double check to see in QuerySurge what we have. Looks like everything looks good, and then we're able to go ahead and import those into QuerySurge into that same folder here. So you can see as we build on the complexity, we are saving time by the ability to generate these SQL statements as opposed to having to figure them out manually, understand what is happening with the SQL, with the mappings, and then craft the statements ourselves. So the skill level and the complexity goes up as the transformation complexity goes up. I have a final template here that we'll take a look at that populates all the mappings for this ETL process. And we're going to load that in. I think there's about 20 mappings that we have in here that we're going to load into QuerySurge and generate and get running. So here's the mappings that cover everything in our mapping document that we have for our sample mapping here. We've already done mappings for our fact order table. So those are mappings of 3.4 and 5. So we can uncheck those, which is another good feature in QuerySurge AI. If we don't want to generate mappings or load in data for a particular set, we can uncheck them, and QuerySurge AI will only generate mappings for the ones that you have checked. So a nice little feature to selectively choose which mappings you want to generate. Coming back over to QuerySurge, everything we've done so far has been within the design library, so dealing with the creation of tests. As we generate SQL for our whole suite or set of ETL mappings, we're going to want to put those together and run them in a more formal process. And to do that, we're going to come over to our scheduling module here. And this is where you can create what we call test suites. And test suites, as you see here, are going to be a collection of query pairs that we can create. I'm going to create what we'll call an AI ETL test suite and click Save. And as the SQL has finished generating for the ones that I've selected, I'll click Import. And we'll load those into our design library. So we can see, if I just do a quick refresh, we should start to see those tests populating in. Once they're populated in, I can load them into our test suite here, either individually, or I can just drag the whole folder in, and all those query pairs will be added to our test suite. I'll give that a save. And at this point, I have a couple options for how I want to run this test suite. I can right click and say run now, which is what I'll do to kick this off. But I also wanted to mention that we do have an inbuilt scheduler. So if we did have this ETL process that ended at a specific time every day, we could set up a recurring process to have this run, let's say, every day at 5 p.m. when I know that the ETL process is going to be completed. Or QuerySurge AI itself, QuerySurge, the main product of QuerySurge itself, has a full RESTful API available to it. So what a lot of our customers like to do is, with their ETL tools, whether it be Informatica or Jenkins or Azure pipelines, they like to integrate QuerySurge with those pipelines to be able to, once this ETL process runs, kick off a test and then pass back those results for that test. And that way you have a fully integrated DevOps, DataOps process in the works. When these tests are running here, I'll come over to our run dashboard module. This is where you can see, as you can see, the test is running that we just created for our test suite. But you can also see any past runs in the history. And the views into those test runs are all recorded in the QuerySurge. So if you did need to do a look back at those previous tests, all that information is available here. Similar to what we're reviewing at the design time run, we can see that categories of our sneakers have failed again. And all the failures that are recorded in QuerySurge can be viewed within this run dashboard. And here we see we have some additional issues with our sales. Looks like there's a rounding issue here, which you can see we're rounding on our data warehouse, but not our sales side. And all that information, even from the smallest difference between your source and your target, is captured in QuerySurge, which is extremely important, especially in data testing when the smallest difference, especially in numerical calculations, can compound themselves and provide real disparate or incorrect information for data that high-level executives, business users are making critical decisions on. So data testing and making sure that data is moving correctly becomes paramount in those scenarios. So I hope you enjoyed my demonstration of QuerySurge AI and how it can help you create those query pairs. Definitely is quite a time saver, especially when you're having to deal with a lot of those transformations. It is in a great place right now for help, but it's only going to get better. And that's what Matt is going to go ahead and talk to you about now. So thank you very much, everyone. Matt, back to you.
Thanks, Mike. That was fantastic. You can definitely see how QuerySurge AI can speed up creation of your test. As you saw, you can take plain English directly from your mappings, convert that into complex SQL with a click of a button. So if you have mapping documents, your testing effort will drop to near nothing in terms of creation of those tests, because you'll be able to drop them all in and generate your SQL, all capable of being used in QuerySurge in a matter of minutes. And the complexity can be very complex. Mike showed a join as well as complete transformations of the text itself. So it's just copy and paste. So where are we going with QuerySurge AI? Because we don't plan on stopping here. We wrote this utility because we saw that mapping documents are something that you can instantly convert into tests and really speed up your testing effort. So we looked at the industry and we've been looking around at different polls, and we found that there's a couple of big concerns about AI. The biggest concern being compliancy and privacy. Very often, customers and companies are not willing to send data out to the cloud, whether that's using OpenAI or using Gemini from Google. They want to have some way to lock down and secure their AI models. Reliability is the next big factor in terms of concerns for AI. There's some concerns that the SQL or the data that gets generated will be incorrect, and how to avoid that. There is the talk of hallucination, where incorrect answers that look right get generated. And we are very cognizant of that. The other two items, high implementation costs. It costs a lot to run a model in the cloud, whether you're hosting your own GPUs or using a cloud-based services. Those model costs can go up considerably if you're using it very regularly. And then finally is lack of technical skills. If you wanted to integrate, say, Gemini or OpenAI internally, you need to have a lot of skills in order to connect to their APIs and set that up with your internal applications and your automation tools. So we wanted to solve these main four concerns here. And we believe we have done that. So on compliance and security, almost all other AI models are cloud hosted. There is some open source models that you can pull down, but they are very time consuming to set up and configure. With QuerySurge AI, we are now going to provide the opportunity for you to host our pre-built custom AI model. That means your data is only in your network. You don't have to worry about your business logic going out to the public cloud. You don't have to worry about your logic being used to train a model whatsoever. You can completely firewall that off from the public internet. So that solves most of the security concerns that companies have had because they're afraid of that data egress going out. Our model will be provided to you so you can host it on both a CPU or a GPU, depending upon what you want to have in terms of performance. In terms of reliability and accuracy, this was also a big concern from us. So we actually created our own model, which was fine-tuned on SQL generation. We created an automated approach to generate SQL from mapping documents with different levels of complexity and validated it against actual database tables. So we ran through the models, we validated the output with actual SQL runs and made sure that the results were 100% correct. And what we found was, in terms of generation, ChatGPT 3.5 was about 31% accurate in generating proper valid SQL. You may have to do some small modifications, or it could have just generated something that was utter garbage. GPT-4 was an improvement. We went up to about 38.63% in terms of generating SQL with these mapping documents, but still not great. QuerySurge AI was over 30% more accurate than GPT-4, providing almost 70% accuracy in generating SQL with completely complex mapping information. So this fine-tuned model is probably the most accurate SQL generation model that's currently out there on the market. We pump through over thousands of queries into both GPT and QuerySurge AI, and you can see that it is significantly better. The main advantage of QuerySurge AI is that we focus specifically on SQL generation. So a lot of the things that might go bad with GPT-4 because it's more generalized, we avoided because we fine-tuned our model. The other item is cost. GPT-4, if you were to send 1,000 mappings, it would roughly cost you about $51. Not that much, but still pretty high, especially if you need to send in hundreds of thousands of mappings for every single column you might have in your data set. By comparison, the same amount of mapping generations is only 43 cents with QuerySurge AI. We're 1/100th of the price, and that is based on the fact that you can self-host QuerySurge AI on a tiny, tiny hardware set. You can run QuerySurge AI completely with the CPU. So if you don't want to get specialized hardware and go out and get some NVIDIA graphics cards, you won't have to do that. But if you do have graphics cards, we have fine-tuned that model down so its size can fit on smaller cards. This way, you can easily spin up QuerySurge AI to validate and create your tests. In terms of QuerySurge, I just want to point out we do have free trials available for anyone that wants to kick the tires of QuerySurge and QuerySurge AI. So if you're on the fence on how this could assist in creating your test cases, and if you don't have an automated testing solution, you just want to see how it works and if it's a good fit for your organization, we have 3 trials available. We have a trial in the cloud, which is 3 days, that is using sample data. So you can just spin it up and take a look at what QuerySurge does without having to connect or spin up any hardware on your side. We have a 15-day trial, just requires an email address, fully fledged functionality to kick the tires on base QuerySurge. And then we have a 45-day POC. Again, all of these options are completely free. The 45-day POC comes with all of our add-ons, including QuerySurge AI, and you'll actually get an expert to help you set up QuerySurge and answer any questions. You can have weekly calls just to see how everything is going and ask anything that you have concerns over. To go to our trials, you can go directly to QuerySurge.com. The button's available in the top right, or you can go to the URL right here, which is /trial. Additionally, as part of this webinar, QuerySurge has put together 5 certifications and courses around data testing, whether that is BI reports, ETL validation, administration in QuerySurge, and we're providing them at absolutely no cost to everyone on this webinar. The code that you see in the center, QS-TG-2024, is available to August 31st. You just need to go to querysurge.com/cert. You can sign up for any one of these certifications, absolutely no cost, self-paced training with a badge that comes from Credly, so you can post it on your LinkedIn. And this gives you a great foundation on how to use our tool, but also the fundamentals of testing ETL process. So everything that we discussed about mapping documents and those practices with them, we go into great detail and how you can use them and part of your testing efforts. And finally, here we'll open it up to Q&A. I know we are pretty short on time. Actually, it looks like we're right on it. We'll be happy to answer any questions, and anything that we can't get to, we'd be happy to reach out to you directly. We're always happy to answer any questions on QuerySurge or anything on the data testing space.
Awesome stuff, guys. We have over 25 questions. Are you able to stay maybe 10 minutes or so to get through a few of them at least?
Oh, definitely. We can stay as long as necessary, Joe. We just didn't know if we had any hard stuff.
Awesome. No, this is recording, so if someone needs to drop off, it'll be sent your way, and all these questions will be in there as well. So appreciate everyone hanging around. But I highly recommend you do, because there's some really good questions here. Maybe if you guys could stop sharing your screen, I want people to see your awesomeness. And then, awesome. There we go. All right, let's get to the very first question is, one second. Can you validate files versus DB and Oracle versus PostgreSQL?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on this one, and I guess we'll bounce back and forth between me and Mike in terms of questions. You can validate any two data sources. So flat files to Postgres, Postgres to SQL Server, absolutely no issue. Our concept of a query pair just basically separates out the technology stacks. So it doesn't matter what two sources you're comparing to. Anything that we can connect to, and we can connect to over 200 plus data sources, you'll be able to validate. We have pre-built drivers, so you can connect to Postgres or out of the box. You can also connect to flat files out of the box. And by flat files, I mean CSV, JSON, XML, Excel files, all out of the box. And then we have other drivers which you can deploy. So there's absolutely no issues connecting to those data sources and validating those data sets.
Nice. Other than hosting costs of QuerySurge AI, is there a license cost?
QuerySurge AI is free to all customers. So if you are an existing customer, reach out to your sales rep. Be happy to set you up with QuerySurge AI and for you to try it out. Anyone interested that's not a QuerySurge customer, head on over to QuerySurge.com. We do offer trials for anyone engaged in a QuerySurge POC. So if you want to see how QuerySurge AI can help you and QuerySurge itself, head on over to QuerySurge.com.
How does it handle complex transformations and filtering? Example, partitioning and ranking and filtering, wave calc and transformation, etc.
So QuerySurge AI,
Yeah, go ahead, man.
QuerySurge AI has been fine-tuned and handles a plethora of different syntaxes. So our large language models and the large language models that we support have been pre-trained on almost all transformation types. Now, will it be 100% accurate all the time? No, there's always a case that there may be some transformation that has some small steps that need to be manually intervened. But overall, we have seen very good accuracy. And as I showed on one of the slides, with our own model, we had a 70% accuracy. And that was dealing with complex transformations, as you saw. And Mike, during the demo, showed a few transformations where we were dealing with concatenations and joins and the like. All of that would be supported directly with QuerySurge AI. The one thing I will say is it's very important to specify your dialect. So if you're dealing with SQL Server versus MySQL, dialect is going to be different. And we have seen that we are able to generate those complex transformations in almost all of the major platforms. If you're dealing with more, I would say, unique platforms that are not widely available, in those cases, the model may need to be fine-tuned a little bit more, or you may need to provide some pre-prompt information, which you can put in your mapping information.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add too, is when you deal with these complex transformations, you want to try to be as specific as possible. If you just put in generate me a wave transformation, it's going to try and guess a little bit, but it may have some issues. So it's always important to be as specific as possible when you can, when you're defining these transformations, as you would with any AI prompts. So it's something just to keep in mind.
Awesome. My point is that the developers will do the ETL using certain tools. Why not we test the data using the same tools that developers use by simply tweaking the mappings and giving them the flavor of testing?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at this is, would you create an application with the developer's code and trust the developer for the functions that they develop in your functional application? You sort of have two sides of the house here. You have the ETL developers that are going to be responsible for interpreting those mappings, developing those ETL pieces of code to move the data. And then you have the testing team. The testing team is going to interpret those same mappings and then write tests based on their understanding of those mappings. So it's almost like taking the developer's word that a fix is good may not be the best QA practice. So that's how I sort of look at it, and that's what we consider as sort of the best practice here is to take your interpretations of those mappings, apply them in a tool like QuerySurge, so you can get that scalability and scope coverage that you need for all the data points that you're validating.
And I'll add a little bit more to that as well. What QuerySurge excels at is the data comparison and the analytical reports that you get out of the system. So if you use, say, Informatica to do an ETL process to, say, SQL Server from a flat file, you still have the challenge of comparing those two sources. Now you can compare the output that is on that one data set. And then if something went wrong, well, you'd have to go through and manually analyze all of that. Additionally, you're putting extra stress on those platforms. So if you're testing production, that would require the QA team to be able to even write to production. Where with QuerySurge, you're just reading access, pulling the data into our system. We take the load and we do the analysis and give you those fine-tuned reports. That way, if you have, say, 100 million records and 10,000 failures, if you want to find a pattern as to what went wrong, QuerySurge will actually highlight those patterns and we've built in reports to say, this is why you're having failures.
Awesome answers. Does QuerySurge require a perfect mapping document in a specified format to pick up for automation?
So with QuerySurge AI, we do have a specified format. We are in the future, as we expand QuerySurge AI, one of our plans is to allow you to import and do your own mapping so you can link to the fields that we require. We do currently require some of those fields. The items like the connection IDs that Mike was showing, those could be left out. It just would require you to go in and manually set those after the fact. So some of those fields definitely are required and would require you to make some formatting changes. But we're looking to streamline that process with a built-in tool in QuerySurge, so you can just import those items in.
Cool.
Yeah, and I would say that if you do know and understand the source connection, the target connection information, and maybe you don't have a full-fledged mapping document, but there's an understanding of the business logic that occurs when you're dealing with your source and your target. That business logic or description of that business logic can be input and prompted to the AI engine and give you back at least something to get started and run your tests with. So it is always best practice to have formal mapping documents, but in the cases where you don't, there still may be some advantages to create some tests and run them with QuerySurge AI.
What SQL dialects does it support?
Oh, that's a great question. We have not seen any particular limits on the dialects it supports. We put through SQL Server, Postgres, Snowflake, Redshift, the Gambit. Right now, the training set that are being used to train SQL parsing is so large and so widespread. We're talking billions upon billions of queries have been pushed through these systems. We've not seen any particular limitations on the dialects that could be supported.
Cool. How can we try out QuerySurge and QuerySurge AI?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning before, head on over to QuerySurge.com. There is a green button, say free trial. QuerySurge itself, you can do a 3-day trial in the cloud, 15-day trial on your own, or if you do want to try out QuerySurge AI, that is going to be part of a POC process where you can try QuerySurge out on your system for 45 days with our assistance. And all those options are listed out under the free trial on QuerySurge.com.
Awesome. I'm terrible with names, but Eugenia, thank you for all your questions. You've been awesome. Thank you for that. This next question is, can it handle multiple source, single target type transformations, use data from two sources, combine them into a single field?
Yeah. So I think there was an example where we showed a join condition. If it's in the same data set, you can 100% do it. If it's in two different data sets and you have, say, a DB link, that is 100% possible. In the case where you have two completely sub-separate systems, say like a SQL Server and a Redshift, and then you're comparing that to Snowflake, in QuerySurge, we have a concept called staging. And you can generate your query pairs or your queries against those source and targets and pull them into our system to create a unified source. That way, if you don't have DB links or any way to join those natively, you can use QuerySurge as a way to get that data in the format that you need.
As you're connecting to data endpoints, say for large data in 10 millions, how is the performance of QuerySurge as it will be pulling all this data?
Well, QuerySurge is going to be the performance of QuerySurge, since it is a server-based application, is going to be based on the hardware that you provide QuerySurge. So QuerySurge itself can be installed on a bare metal server, a VM, or with, as we're seeing a lot more now in the private cloud, whether it's AWS or Azure. Since its components include a database and application server, the more power you give it, the faster it will perform. So it's kind of hard to answer specifically how well it will perform against 10 million records, as each record set can be different too, depending on how many columns and the data types that you have. But the easiest answer to that is the hardware requirements that you provide QuerySurge. That's going to gauge how well it will perform. So we routinely have customers that test millions, sometimes billions of records, and they've provided QuerySurge ample amount of hardware to be able to do that, and they're happy with the results.
And just for a very generic example, on my laptop where I have QuerySurge installed, I'm able to run tens of millions of records, in a matter of minutes in terms of analysis. So you still have to worry about, as Mike mentioned, the other factors in the mix. But if you have a fast connection, fast hardware, you'll be able to pull that data down and compare it incredibly quickly. And it's 1,000 times faster, millions of times faster than trying to do it manually or to try to unify those sources yourself in some other platforms, because we fine-tune it specifically for this use case.
Okay, great. Is the internally hosted option available now or in future enhancements?
So the internally hosted option is not available right now. It's something that we are actively in development for. We have the model. It's just a matter of giving enough installation built for it to be easily deployed to a user. We don't want to have any, I would say, learning curve. It's very difficult sometimes to set up AI models, and we want to make it a one-click and go type item. So whether you're doing that on a CPU or if you're doing it on a GPU, cloud, or in your own internal network, we want to make a very streamlined process. The model is built and tested. It's just getting that nuts and bolts down so that we can have nice deployment for it.
All right, we're almost 15 minutes over. I just want to check in with everyone. We still have over 60 people online, which is good retention. So do you guys still have time to take questions? I want to respect your time and the audience's time as well.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. So next question then is, can you use QuerySurge AI without purchasing QuerySurge?
QuerySurge AI is a companion product. So you do need to be a QuerySurge customer to use and receive all the benefits of QuerySurge AI. So they are tied together.
Would it even require a write access or with any limited privileges on the database for the tool to read data? We had a few cases in SAP HANA DB.
So there is, you will have to have read privileges on your particular source and target systems. We do have numerous customers currently using SAP HANA, both hosted and in the cloud. We never require any write privileges when it comes to QuerySurge. And we, in fact, say to customers, you shouldn't have write privileges for a testing solution. It should only be able to read your data sets. So there may be some small configurations in terms of account setups or networking access, but you only need read access. And we definitely have connected to SAP HANA, both in the cloud and hosted.
Does Query AI read and write the complex transformations that require multiple source tables with multiple key columns for the single target table? How does it pick up the granularity and the referential integrity of the data model?
So yeah, I think that goes back to what Matt says. If they are within Matt was saying with the earlier questions, if the data sets do reside within the same data source, you can do joins like we were showing in my basic example. But as long as you specify the table relations within both the template and your prompting, you should be able to pick up and join those together. For things like where we have disparate data sources, files joining to databases, that's something where you can utilize an additional feature of QuerySurge, which we call our staging feature. And it will require, additional configuration and setup, but it allows you to do something you really can't do with any other product, is join two disparate data sources together and compare them against a third data source to identify those differences.
And I think this also goes to how well and how fine-tuned these large language models have gotten, that they're able to handle these complex statements. You can pretty much go as much depth as you want with these large language models and with our model, as long as you provide the detail, as Mike said. So if it's descriptive enough for you to explain it to a friend, it's descriptive enough for you to explain it to QuerySurge AI.
Good example. How does the AI handle STM mappings that are in less than standardized format? Please note, I once received a design document written on a series of cocktail napkins.
The format is definitely important. The AI platforms themselves are getting better and better at understanding nuance when it comes to how we communicate. There may be some challenges. We are looking as well to allow you to create your mappings directly in QuerySurge. So what you saw before with Mike was using an Excel file. We want to streamline that, as mentioned, a nice visual way to map your existing files, whether it's Word or Excel, and pull that into QuerySurge to create a nice unified approach. We have this concept called participant users who can come in and just look around, and it's a great place to store your information. So if you have things that are just written on, napkins or anything like that, sadly, you'll have to re-enter those. But maybe we will have an AI, written to text thing where you'd be able to just take a picture of that and just speed up that process as well.
Nice. We have, let's say, 30 columns mapping. Instead of running 30 queries to verify each column, can we have a consolidated SQL to validate the whole table along with the transformations?
Yeah, you could certainly do that. I have seen, and I've done implementations like that. In most cases, I do recommend breaking the columns out, as I mentioned during the demo. And that is to help and assist with sort of pinpointing the issues. So if I were to run a test with 30 columns, QuerySurge would absolutely be able to identify those failures. You would be able to view them in QuerySurge in that design time run view or within the scenario view. There's filtering options, so you can sort of narrow down which columns are the problematic ones. And there's reports that you can run to do that as well. Best practice in most cases, though, we do recommend for each transformation that you're having, you write a separate query pair for. This way, you can easily pinpoint within your test runs, especially if you have hundreds of tables that you're testing. When failures occur, you can narrow that down to a query pair that tests that particular mapping. But choice is yours. We don't enforce one way or the other, so it's up to you how you want to utilize QuerySurge. So if you want to test the entire table and all the transformations within it, that is certainly doable within the tool. If you want to break it down by transformation, column to column, you can certainly do that as well.
All right. Do you support unstructured data as well?
We do. In terms of QuerySurge, we do require you to often provide a schema to provide some type of structure to it. So if it's unstructured data, we are doing column to column comparisons. So you will need to convert that. We have built-in tools for that when it comes to certain flat file types, but you would have to provide a structure for us to do the analysis. If you wanted to just do a complete binary comparison, it wouldn't give you the granularity to say, this is what went wrong. This particular field is wrong. You can definitely do that as well. I personally like providing structure because it gives you an easier way to analyze the results, and it's more granular.
Excellent. Can it connect to flat files in S3 or any other cloud storage?
Yeah, actually, probably one of the more common cases we have are connected to those types of files, as everyone does shift to the cloud, whether they're in S3 or in Azure blob storage, Azure data lakes. One of the more common that we have are connected to files in those cloud systems. So yeah, absolutely possible with QuerySurge.
Excellent. Okay. If there are more than 100 tables and 100 columns, we again spend time creating this format in QuerySurge. This again consumes time similar to that of SQL preparation. Are we really saving time?
I would definitely say you are. It's a great question because if you're dealing with pure, say, select stars or simple migrations, you don't need AI. We have a wizard for that. It's drag and drop. There's a button that you press. It will link the columns. It'll link your tables together and you're golden. If you're dealing with transformations, which can be very complex, the SQL that could be generated with QuerySurge AI, the examples we gave, they're, a few lines of SQL. But if you had to write a SQL statement that is 150 lines long, that's doing complex joins with where conditions and transformations on, concatenating columns and doing min maxes and the like, it could take you hours just to write that SQL statement. Whereas if you just take that mapping information in and describe it out, it would be able to generate for you in a matter of seconds. Additionally, you may not have the skills for that particular task. So if you have an engineer that maybe is not familiar with the syntax of Snowflake, or maybe has never written SQL before, they can take those mapping documents and load them all in. So there is some work at the beginning, and we're looking to alleviate that. But the savings for when you have those transformations is astronomical.
Awesome. I want to thank everyone for hanging in there. We're still over 50, and so people are interested. So let's keep going. Are there any keyword formats needed to follow?
Since it's a natural language processing model, you can sort of describe how your transformations would work. For current iteration of QuerySurge, anyone trying out does get access to our knowledge base. And in our knowledge base, we have certain keywords that we've found to work for specific transformations. But again, as long as you're descriptive as possible and clear as you can be, we found that it does react pretty well. And for those specific keywords that you're maybe wanting to use, we do have knowledge base articles, as I mentioned, to reference.
All right, another question from Scott. Can we also input a data model to supplement the test case generation, i.e. referential integrity test?
So we don't currently support this now. It is something that we are looking at. We do have our query wizard, which does this a little bit. It is an interesting idea, and it's something that we are actively looking at.
Excellent. Does it have a facility to validate file versus DB in two different DBs?
Yeah. With our, depending on the file type, as Matt mentioned, we do come bundled with a flat file driver, Excel driver that you can connect to. And we do utilize other drivers to connect to different data types, different data files, JSON files, Parquet files, et cetera. And those can all be one side of your query pair, and whatever your other data source is on the target, you can set up a query pair to point to that and run your comparisons that way. So yeah, the answer is we're able to connect to most anything out there in the marketplace and in any technology in its form. As long as there is a JDBC driver to go along with it, we can set it up in QuerySurge and pull that information in and compare it.
I don't know if you saw this, but speaking of JDBC connections, does the JDBC connection help reduce egress cost in Google Cloud Platform?
We'd have to take a look at that. In terms of QuerySurge, if you wanted to, you can keep your QuerySurge instance or your agents inside of Google Cloud to avoid having data go out of that network. So if you're getting charged for data egress, you can definitely put QuerySurge where your data is, and that way you can avoid that data egress. I'm not quite sure if GCP charges something differently for connecting via JDBC versus RESTful, or how they're approaching that exactly. And it's definitely something we could take a look at.
3 questions left. Let's say there was a false alarm and that the sneakers shoes was an appropriate derived value given the source and intended population of target. How quickly can you teach it to accept the issue as expected behavior?
Yeah, I think if that was the case, it would in turn be a requirements defect, right? So we had requirements that weren't developed properly, that information wasn't included in there. So we'd have to go back to our business users or our architects or whoever created that document and get together with the team and find out to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And once we do that, that would then be considered a transformation, right? So we would then include that as part of our prompting, as part of our logic that wear shoes, then sneakers, and we should be able to have the AI engine generate the code for that and the SQL for that.
Okay, so this came in the chat during your demo, so I don't know if you will remember the context, but they want to know, we can add that in the template as well, right? Target and source data type.
You can definitely put the target and source data type in the requirements mapping and say, convert this to an integer. So if you want it to be an integer that came out and avoid that data type mismatching, you could 100% do that. Well, we didn't include that in our default format because usually that requires some type of casting, and there might be rules around that casting. For example, one of the examples Mike showed was a data truncation issue where we had a decimal point that was truncated to 2 decimals, and that may be the requirement there. So you might have to describe that particular process, but you can 100% do that to avoid that. And if you don't have data types, as Mike showed, you can turn off data type checking, and QuerySurge will ignore the types, but still compare the data. So the value 1 in an integer to the string 1 would be comparable 100% if you turn data typing checking off.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and then changes in data types can also be considered a transformation in and of themselves. So if I had, an integer data type on my source and that turns into a varchar on the target, even though the values themselves are the same, you'll want to, in some cases, check that the data type has changed. And in certain cases, you can specify lengths of data types. So you want to make sure that those are appropriate based on your mapping. So that's also something that you can do with QuerySurge, even though the underlying value is the same, making sure that the data types do align based on your ETL process. And that's also something to address the question that you can include in your template, in your prompting, to do those types of castings or converting or whatever syntax you're looking for based on the data type, the data technology that you're querying against.
That's a great point that you mentioned the data types, because as you do a migration effort or as you're moving data between, say, your on-prem Netezza to Snowflake, they may not have comparable data types, and that might be part of those requirements. So it's very important to have that established out and as part of your testing, because you don't want to just make that assumption that it's acceptable in those particular cases. There may be some pre-built requirements that are there.
Last question. How accurate is the NLP conversion to SQL? Do we need to manually perform prompt engineering tailored to the project's specific business terms? Will it be able to understand and apply the direct SQL logic, or does it rely solely on NLP?
So in terms of accuracy, in our testing, we showed about a 70% accuracy in terms of a generic transformation that we were providing to the system. And this was not specific business terms. So just providing, I want to transform this in this way, or a direct map, just plain English. If you have inbuilt terms that you use locally in your organizations for certain types of transformations that maybe don't match industry standards, in those cases, you would need to provide a little bit of prompt direction to say, hey, this is what this means in our organization. And our hope is that once we go with our inbuilt solution with our model, you'll be able to fine tune it further for your use cases. So right now, our model is not fine tunable for your data sets, but we will give you the opportunity moving forward to say, hey, this particular nomenclature is this, and would allow you to fine tune that a little bit more.
Awesome stuff. I just want to thank both of you for staying over time, over 30 minutes to answer all these questions. Really appreciate it. Before we go, though, any parting words of wisdom before you leave the guild?
I just want to say this has been fantastic. I think that AI is definitely going to be critical in testing moving forward. I think that while there's big concerns that it will replace, positions or jobs, I think it just helps speed up your efforts. And I've used it personally in multiple areas to just get better understanding of the things that I'm testing and to just speed up my overall efforts. And I think that it's just going to continue to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add that AI isn't going anywhere. So, it's us that needs to adapt and taking a look at it from a testing perspective. I mean, there are real benefits to it. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out how to join 10 tables together, just coming up with a specific prompt to be able to do that and having your SQL generated really benefits everyone, the testers and the entire team included, because you're able to, as we always look to speed up testing, right? That's one of the main goals is to get the testing out and done and meet those release deadlines. This is something from a QuerySurge AI perspective that really can help. And I say that from experience, having written many, many thousands of lines of SQL.
Absolutely. Well, great stuff. Again, a lot of love in the chat. A lot of people say great presentation. So thank you so much. And thank you, RTTS, for partnering with the Guild on this free training. Thank you both. Appreciate you both. Thank you. Cheers.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks. See you later.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
All right. Thanks again, RTTS and QuerySurge for partnering with the Guild on this training. Make sure to learn more about how they can help you with your AI ETL efforts. We'll be sending links in your email on how to learn more. They also have they just dropped it, a cool way to get free certifications as well. I'll try to include the code for that and the link for that as well. Thank you for everyone hanging around. Really good turnout. Thank you for all your questions and participation. Really appreciate it. If you haven't already, just make sure to fill out that very last survey. Just 3 questions to let us know how this webinar went for you, because we're always trying to make things better to create more content in the future that you're interested in. And really appreciate you all. Awesome stuff. Thank you for all your awesome questions and participation. And as always, test everything to keep the good. We'll see you here next time. Cheers.